What crazy butt story do you need to tell? When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I worked at a healthcare facility where I would float to different offices around the county based on who needed the help. This one particular morning I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled to be in the office next door to where I was working and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came and he walked into my office straight up to me and says he had a DRS appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing cause I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was the office next door and he left. A little while later I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes and on my way out he trailed behind me and I held the door for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. This made me so sad for you and him. Sad for you because growing up you never got to experience any kind of relationship with him. Sad for him because he walked right by one of his greatest treasures and didn't even know it. 3-4 years ago, I was living in this bigger European city, 2 mil people, for some years now. I went with a girl to a pub, and since all tables were full, we sat at the bar. There was an older guy sitting next to me, 50ish, white hair, smoking a cigar, who kinda distracted me, because he reminded me of my uncle. Now mind, my uncle was living in the US for around 25 years already. He didn't look like that dude, nor did he act too similar. That bar guy just had some gestures that reminded me of him, mixed with the look of another distant relative. So, the girl I was with goes to the toilet, so I can't hold back anymore and look this dude in the eyes and tell him he reminds me of my uncle. He jokingly asks, "What's his name?" I tell him, and also tell him he lives in the US and works in field of work. And then the guy looks stunned and tells me the names of my whole freaking family. Turns out he was the flatmate of my uncle 30 years ago for about half a year. That was definitely one of the weirdest bar stories I experienced. TLDR. Went to bar in big city. Guy reminds me of my uncle. I tell him. Turns out he was my uncle's flatmate 30 years ago for half a year. Uncle lives on another continent for 25 years now. That's interesting. My guess would be that either your uncle picked up that gesture from him or vice versa. Great story either way. The world is a small place. So me and my brother are fraternal twins. My stepmom passed away due to breast cancer when we were around 15 years old. She was like a second mother to us and had been around since we were very young. 5 years old. Now fast forward to our junior year of college. I attended a school in upstate NY while he attended a university in the state of Florida. One night I woke up in sweat with tears coming down my eyes. I had the most vivid dream. I was in a house and my stepmother was there. I knew she had passed in this dream, which was a first for me. She hugged me, told me how handsome I had become, and that she loved me. I woke up drenched in sweat thinking WTF was that. I didn't say anything to anybody and went to class. As I'm walking back to my apartment after class, I get a call from my brother. His first words were, "I know this is going to sound weird, but I had the most vivid dream about Maggie last night." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he went on to describe the same dream I had just experienced the night prior. We've never had a twin moment like this and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's always been a story that I wanted to tell. Was served lunch sometime during a flight. While eating, noticed that the woman next to me is slowing down in her movements, slower cutting, slower chewing, etc. Suddenly she stops completely in her movements, fork and knife in hands, half cut food on her plate, face bowed forward above her plate and nothing else. Touched her on the shoulder, pushed a little bit, asked her if everything was okay. No reaction. Couldn't really tell if she was still alive. Was it the air conditioning or her breath? No idea. Didn't want to panic and frighten everyone else. You know, dead person. Made eye contact with a stewardess. Point towards next to me. Couple minutes later, 5 stewardesses including co-pilot form a barrier around our seats and like in a movie tried to get a reaction, aka "Don't you die on me." Woman wakes up, looks up and says just this one sentence: "I took really strong sleeping pills," and goes back to sleep in the same Tyrannosaurus posture. As if this has happened before. and she had anticipated this conversation, as if she knew that her mind would only be awakened long enough for one sentence. So for the entire remaining 6-7 hours flight, there is this lady next to me, mimicking a Tyrannosaurus, her hands still grabbing the now removed fork and knife, drooling on the table, and everyone passing by giving me this questioning look. Best flight ever. I am from a tiny province in the Philippines who decided to work in Manila right after college way back 2007. I got into a call center and met a lot of friends. Stayed in the company for about 2 years. Graveyard shift wasn't for me. Fast forward to 2013. My widowed mom in the province met through a mutual friend, a French guy, and they both got interested with each other. They eventually got engaged in 2014 and married soon after. 90 DF France. So they could move back to France. As they were planning their trip, I posted on social media about possible Filipino connections in France to help my mom transition well. A former colleague of mine in that call center in Manila many years back sent me a message. Told me that she has this Filipino friend, let's call her Rowena, who has been living in France for 20+ years now, and that she may be able to help my mom. So, I told my mom to add Rowena on Facebook and connect with her. They did, and they got into talking. One day my mom was Skyping with her. They were talking about their husbands when my mom pulled out and showed to her a vintage photo of her husband when he was in university. An old photo of him sitting on a couch with his then best friend whom he has not seen since graduating. Career opportunities abroad and no cell phones during that time led to them growing apart. As soon as Rowena saw the photo, she gasped. "That's my husband beside your husband," she said. She then hurriedly went to her office and took out the exact same photo which her husband has kept through the years as well. After a few shocks and tears, two long lost best friends were able to catch up after nearly 40 years. TLDR. By amazing coincidence, two best friends found each other through their wives. For context, I'm a 19-year-old Scottish guy who was interrailing around Europe for a month. We were in Budapest for a few days hitting up the clubs and parties, really enjoying ourselves. Eventually it comes time to leave and we decide to get an early morning train to Split, around 5 AM. Anyways, we have 2 taxis booked to the train station and we stumble out still kind of half asleep and start loading our stuff into the taxis. As we're loading we see 3 young guys sprinting full speed ahead up the road shouting "Fricking run." We laughed. Thought they were just having drunk fun. No, they were not. As we get in the taxis, this guy covered head to toe in tattoos and others blood comes to my door and asks to shake my hand. Not wanting to offend this crazy looking sucker, I shake his bloodied hand and he wishes me well. Phew. Got off lightly. Guy tries to do the same with our big frick off Bulgarian taxi driver. He refuses. Bulgarian taxi driver gets in taxi and starts to back out. Crazy frick is not happy with this and starts to go to town on this guy's taxi with elbows, fists, knees, etc. We start to drive away thinking there's no chance he's gonna be bothered to follow a taxi going 20 miles per hour, right? Now this frick is frickin' Superman. Sprints faster than humanly possible after our taxi with this mad look in his eye. Taxi driver goes to turn a corner, thinking we'd got away from him, but as we turn there's a bin lorry blocking the entire road. Crazy frick rounds this corner like an atom out the frickin' Hadron Collider. At this point I am shouting half asleep Scottish at our taxi driver, "Lock a fucking doors," which he thankfully does. Crazy frick starts battering the windows in with fists, blood smeared everywhere, knuckles burst, rips off the wing mirrors, starts smashing the windows in with them. At this point our friends in the taxi behind us are buckled in laughter as we sit in pure terror as the frickin' Grim Reaper looms ready to take our souls. Both taxi drivers get out to get him to frick off, spits in both their faces and throws the wing mirror at them, then books it out of there. Maddest thing about it is as he was leaving he very nicely apologizes to one of the locals watching this in awe. TLDR. Don't refuse handshakes from men covered in blood, it's rude. This is a long story from the early 1980s that has Kentucky justice in it. My family lived just outside of Cincinnati on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. My father's older brother lived here as well and was a father to 4 daughters. One of his daughters at the age of 18 or so was dating a guy who was a little older than her, who convinced her to move down south with him. My uncle approved and his daughter headed south with her boyfriend into a Kentucky holler that his extended family lived in. Time passed and my uncle hadn't heard from his daughter in a while, and he started to grow concerned. My cousin called my uncle in distress from a payphone at a grocery store, saying she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family and being held hostage and worked like a slave. But before my uncle could learn more, the phone was cut off. At this point in the story, it's important to know my uncle was an avid hunter and gun collector. He explained to his wife and other daughters the situation. He packed up his Oldsmobile Delta 88 with his favorite guns and headed down to the holler his daughter's boyfriend was from. He was going down in hillbilly country, where there were no street names, just dirt roads and family farms. By the time he finally found their farmhouse, it was night. The boyfriend's family was on the porch shooting shotguns off into the air, fully expecting to scare my uncle away. My uncle stopped his car 50 yards from the house and popped the trunk. He methodically lined up his rifles on the hood of the car facing the house, tooling up like Arnold in Commando on the beach. My uncle was an extremely large man, who was well known for having an explosive temper. Completely unfazed, he shouted up to the hillbillies, "If my daughter doesn't come down in 5 minutes, I'm going to come up there and kill every man, woman, and child I see." The boyfriend and his brothers ran back inside the house, and not even 1 minute later my cousin came running out of the house with her single suitcase. Same uncle another time was driving on a bridge that spanned some small river. The bridge was old and only had enough room for one car to traverse at a time. He came to a standoff with 3 hillbillies in a pickup truck who were honking and yelling at him to back up. My uncle, ever stubborn, refused and instead got out of his car, figuring he'd show them how big he was and they'd change their tune. One of the hillbillies shouted to my uncle, "You don't scare us. There are 3 of us," and my uncle, like a psychopath, shouted back, "Do all 3 of you know how to swim?" To which they relented and backed up their truck to let my uncle pass. I got a pilot's license and flew across the country smuggling marijuana 4 times and then stopped. Now I work a normal job and I can't tell anyone about the coolest, dumbest thing I've ever done. A little while back, my roommate was contacted by a wealthy man in the area who wanted to pay her to be his live-in pet for an entire month. She thought that this was a cutesy way of saying that it was a sugar daddy baby arrangement. Turns out what he actually meant was that she would be given room, board and a very healthy allowance to spend a large portion of her day dressed as a cat, walking on her hands and knees, eating out of a bowl, using a litter box, and, yes, sleeping in a little cage at night. Physical intimacy wasn't even on the table. He was only interested in having a human cat for a month. She seriously considered the offer for a weekend, and then politely declined. My friend had the same thing, but she had to act like furniture. I used to go to a Korean middle school, so physical punishment for any bad behavior was expected. One day a few kids were talking in class, so our butt of a math teacher decided that we somehow all deserved to get punished. He told us to kneel on our desks and started hitting us on the thigh one by one. We all complained but figured we'd just get it done with and get back to class. But one of my classmates completely snapped. He pulled out a knife from his pocket, I'd ask why he had one, and put it towards the teacher's throat and threatened to kill him. At that moment I was genuinely afraid I was about to witness a murder and was scared, but for some reason every single one of my classmates was laughing at this situation. I still don't understand why, but thankfully there was no murder. The kid just ran off to the front office. BC he realized he fricked up and came back begging for forgiveness. Somehow he never really ended up getting punished. The cops weren't called, no trial, no suspension, nothing. He did get forced to transfer to a new school, but he didn't get hit with a single thing that would stay on his record. Some kids laugh during highly emotional situations as a natural response, not because they are taking delight in what's going on, but because they are nervous and don't know what else to do. Usually by the time you're 18 you grow out of it, but it still happens for some people. When I was learning to fly at a sketchy flight school, I was doing a pre-flight check flight, close to the end of the program. I was doing the run up in a Cessna when I smelled something. "Do you smell that? Smells like gas," I say. Instructor, 21YO, shrugs, annoyed. I open the door, and there is a spreading puddle of that gas under the plane. Crap, the instructor panics, "Stay in the plane. I'll get help," and runs off. As soon as I got the engine off, I noped out of there and watched the plane dump all its fuel on the runway. They kindly gave me another plane and instructor. They fixed their plane, and a month later, I read about the same plane crashing. Due to fuel issues, 1 fatality, no significant repercussions for company. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to this small, like a few hundred residents, town in northern Australia. We started going to school and after a few weeks we made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about this club in town called the Nature Rangers. The way they described it, it sounded like some off-brand Boy Scouts with camping and hiking and all that. They also said they gathered at their ranger hall on Fridays to have movie nights with popcorn and hot dogs. Me and my younger sister begged our parents to let us join. So on Friday night we got dropped off at the hall. So we lined to go into the hall and all the kids are joking and laughing. They opened the doors and we all start walking in and the whole mood shifted. All the kids immediately shut up. As I walked in I looked up and on the walls was all these signs. Sinners must burn. The devil is coming for you. Christ is your only savior. Stuff like that. The one that stood out was this huge mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. It was an eye-opener for us city kids. What happened next got weirder. It was something you see in movies about fanticles in the deep south of America. We sang these weird folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons. We had to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. The one song that stuck out years later went, "He's under my feet. He's under my feet. Satan is under my feet." The song was accompanied with a dance we had to learn. Me and my sister were looking at each other like, when is this going to be over? Then after all of that we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls were to stay at the hall, but the boys were off to go with this creepy looking old guy, who they called Brother Joseph. He was getting all the boys to get into his white van to take them for a drive. That's when I knew that enough was enough. I snuck out of the line and silently got my sister and said, "We are going." By this time it was late at night, so we snuck off into the dark. Our home was on the other side of town, so we slowly made our way home, creeping from yard to yard. Every time we saw car lights we hid in trees or bushes. When we got about half a km from home I told my sister to leg it, and we sprinted the whole way home, burst into our house and proceeded to tell our parents the whole thing. They always say they had never seen us so scared. It's a story we laugh about at the time, but at the time it was dodgy as frick. We lived in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned Nature Rangers to us ever again. The far western to northern Australia have some serious grooming cults. Apparently there's a lot of money to make of baby boomers that live there. Years ago I was hitchhiking north of Richmond, Virginia when a car with 2 dudes picked me up. We got to chatting and it turns out they were headed to their friend's place to shoot guns and asked me if I wanted to join. I asked if his friend would be okay with a random homeless-esque fellow shooting his guns and he said heck, just pretend to be my cousin from Seattle. So instead of sitting on the highway in 100-degree weather I spent an afternoon eating hamburgers, shooting guns, and blowing crap up with bags of tannerite on some random employee's woodland property. Don't remember your name dude, but you were the man. Thanks for a great memory. I stole my own car back once. I used to restore classic cars. I had the most valuable one I've ever had to body shop, and he took forever to finish it. He had painted other cars for me, but apparently developed a drug problem. I would check on the car every week to see if there was any progress. Finally, after a year he told me he painted 90% of it, but he's asking for more money than we originally agreed. I drive there on a Friday afternoon unannounced, and see my car outside the shop, worth a ton of money, with the shop owner nowhere in sight. His neighbor told me he had left the car outside for 3 days and several people have tried to steal it. So I call a tow truck and tow it to my garage right away. On my home the shop owner calls me over and over again. He thought somebody stole the car. He kept calling me for months. I never responded. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means whenever I have the time, I will ride my bike away from the city I live in, into the mountainous suburbs to challenge myself up some of the local climbs. It was another one of these excursions. I had just rode up and down a big bus mountain, on the road headed back to the city center. I was fairly tired, still had 40 km to get back home. All of a sudden, I see traffic on the opposite lane stopped for some reason. What I immediately saw next I was not prepared for. I saw an ostrich on my lane, in front of me, running after the car ahead. WTF. It's not like the country I live in is habitat to any ostriches. Slowly, I follow the ostrich, which is running after the car ahead, faced with a decision. Do I overtake the ostrich? Now I'm no expert on ostriches, but I do remember reading that ostriches run really quickly, and that they can be aggressive towards humans. I don't want to become the victim of an ostrich attack, but I do want to get home quickly, as it was starting to get dark. After hesitating for a while, I gave it all I had and overtook the ostrich. The rest isn't that interesting. I managed to get home unharmed, but to this day, it remains one of my most surreal experiences, running into an ostrich on a bike ride. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.